Indiana Representatives Ron Bacon and Matt Hostetler join us this week on WNIN Lawmakers, coming up next. I'm John Gibson, and this is WNIN Lawmakers. Language that could remove Attorney General Curtis Hill from office clears the House. An unexpected change to school referendum money passes the state Senate. And a bill easing restrictions on child labor is headed to the governor. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports on the week at the State House.
Current law only says the Attorney General must have a law license and be a citizen. But with Curtis Hill's license in jeopardy over allegations he groped for women, House lawmakers voted to clarify the statute. Now, the AG would be ineligible to run or serve if their license was suspended for at least 30 days. The Senate made a surprise addition to an education bill that would allow public schools to share referendum dollars with charter schools. Supporters of the effort say it could help schools pass those ballot questions, but some K-12 advocates worry this is the first step to forcing public schools to split that funding. And a bill going to the governor's desk will make it easier for minors to work, eliminating student work permits by the summer of 2021. The bill would increase the amount of hours 16 to 18-year-olds can work to 40 hours a week during the school year and 48 hours during holidays. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
I'm now joined by Indiana State Representative Ron Bacon, whose district includes large portions of Warwick, Spencer, and Pike counties, and Indiana State Representative Matt Hostetler, who represents all of Gibson County and portions of Knox, Pike, Vanderburgh, and Posey counties. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, we're on the home stretch here, the final days of this legislative session. Let's start with something Brandon mentioned, Senate Bill 409. That increases the number of hours that 16 to 18-year-olds can work each week to as many as 40 during the school year, and eliminates the work permit requirement for minors. As I understand it, you both voted for this bill, and it raised a few eyebrows. Are either of you concerned that students could be overextending themselves if they're working full-time and going to school as well? We'll start with you, Representative Bacon.
Well, it could be. You're right. They could overextend, but they really could now. If they wanted to, I mean, without knowing, but at least now we'll have an idea of what's going on, hopefully, with that. There are some other limitations on that. They have to be under certain supervision. They're not allowed to work after 10 o'clock at night without adult supervision, and that adult means someone over 18 years of age. Mm-hmm. So a 17-year-old in a McDonald's couldn't be supervising a 15-year-old at McDonald's after those hours. So things of that nature. But and also, I think it'll help us in our summer work program with going over 40 to 48 hours, and there was some of the people who do employ those, especially Holiday World and those in that area.
Those kinds of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare to what the rules were before?
Well, with the 14-year-olds, I don't think you could work past 10 o'clock at all, or with underage. Mm-hmm. And then you also had to come up and get work permit. That's one of the things we really got rid of also. Even if you were from out of town or out of state, you were required to, if you lived in Owensboro and you wanted to work at Holiday World, you were required to come to Indiana, go to South Spencer High School, the closest high school, get a work permit, even though you didn't go to school there to do that. So we eliminated that and make it easier to come and get work here in Indiana.
All right, Representative Hostetler, to let you weigh in on this, do you have any concern about, say 16-year-olds working that much while going to school? I mean, is it a little too early for them to be working that much?
Well, I think there are a lot of kids that are young adults that want to get out and work as much as they can, and employers still have the ability to rein that in if they see that anyone's being overworked. But especially in this economy with the job market that we have, employers are hungry for folks, and we're trying to get young people workforce ready, and if we can get them some more experience actually out in the workforce, I believe the more the better if they're willing to do it. It's nothing, if they ever feel strained, they can leave themselves, but I believe employers will want to foster these young people and keep them around as long as they can, and overexertion won't help them either.
Right. So in other words, you're sort of putting the trust more in the employers instead of, say, the state government.
Exactly.
And you're okay with that?
I believe that the market can do a lot of things that the government overregulates just a little bit, and I think that these young folks are more than capable of doing it. They're mature enough to make those decisions, and this just gives them the opportunity. If they want to go and be willfully employed, they can do that, and if they choose to go elsewhere, we don't hinder them from that either.
All right, well, let's move on to something else involving kids. House Bill 1009 passed the House and Senate unanimously. It makes sure that a minor's paid internship doesn't count against a low-income family's assistance benefits. Does that mean that a minor's regular income counts? As we say, it passed unanimously. Why do you think this was important, Representative Hostetler?
There was a lot of concern that as people wanted to get into these programs, since that income would count towards it, there may be families that would be hurt by the income, and they would ask to pull these young folks out of these programs. And a lot of the legislators, many of whom are business owners themselves and advocates and educators, they didn't want to do anything that would harm the family, especially if someone's wanting to go out and work. We don't want to attach a punishment to that, and so this was a way to put guardrails around that and to keep these people interested in these programs.
Yes, and I'll let you weigh in as well, Representative Bacon. Why do you feel that was, as I say, it passed unanimously? Why do you think this was an important measure?
Well, I really feel, an internship is more like an entry-level position. It's something that you're interested in, an area of work. Even at the State House, we have interns. And so if they're interested in a political science or getting into law, then that's an internship so they can learn what actually is there and what's available. So if we don't do this, we limit what the low-income folks can do and what they can get into. So we're trying to raise the bar for them to give them the ability to get into to expand what they know and what they can learn. So I think it's a great idea.
All right. Well, let's move on to education here. In the report we heard just moments ago, Brandon also mentioned House Bill 1065. The Senate tacked on an amendment this week, added by a tiebreaker from Lieutenant Governor Crouch, that allows referendum dollars to be shared with charter schools. You both, as I understand it, supported the House version back in January. We'll start with you, Representative Bacon. What do you think of this change that was made over in the Senate?
Well, I'm kind of surprised there was a change because charter schools are public schools, and that's in statute. And a lot of people forget that, and they're designed for certain special things, especially, signature schools designed for something here locally, but it's part of EVSC and it's a public school. So to leave them out, to me, would be the wrong thing to do. And if you're voting on a school referendum, it's the whole county or the whole school district is voting for that referendum for extra money. So it should be split equally amongst everyone involved. So I think it's a good amendment.
Representative Hostetler, I'll let you weigh in on this. What did you think of that change regarding charter schools?
I haven't looked into all of the details, and it's been a busy week, but my understanding is that it's a May provision, so there are still things in there that the locals, if they choose not to do it, it's not a shall provision, so they have the final authority is still left up to the locals at that point. We haven't forced anything on them. We've just, I believe, just given clarification to something that was already something that could be done, just actually writing it out for them to have read.
So local school districts can decide whether to allow this or not?
I understand it's a May provision. I haven't seen since, because like I said, it wasn't in our version, and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I don't know if it's been dissented on or if they can.
There's a motion to stay that way or not.
Right.
Still got a couple days to go.
Right. Yeah,
So things can change a lot.
Yes, we are on the home stretch, as we mentioned. Just 2, maybe 3 days left in the Indiana General Assembly session. Let's go on to an issue we've talked about before, and actually a bill we've talked about before, and that's House Bill 1004, which addresses surprise medical billing. It passed the House unanimously. There were some concerns that changes made in a Senate committee would have an adverse effect on rural hospitals. And on the Senate floor this past week, they reverted back to the House language. You both voted for this bill, the medical billing bill. It also has other measures in it as well. Why do you think it's important? And we'll start with Representative Hostetler.
This is my first session, or my second session, my first term, and the only bill that I authored my first session was actually to do with transparency. It's an issue that's very important to me. I've had personal experience with two very similar procedures within my family, and the only difference was the hospital, and one cost twice as much as the other. Same doctor, same insurance, same deductible, and if I would have just been given the information that if I go to one hospital rather than the other, I could have saved tens of thousands of dollars, I would have done that. And so that was, the House version was very, very directed towards the transparency portion. I know the Senate tacked on some things with site of service and other things that they thought could possibly be detrimental to some hospitals. That's been pulled back. I believe transparency is absolutely important for, it has to be one of the biggest economic pressures that we have here in the state of Indiana, from the employers to the employees. If they can just make informed decisions, I believe that every family will be better off, and every employer that pays into these programs will have more funds available to them to pay a better wage.
And I know some of those measures or those amendments that were added to the measure in the Senate, some folks were referring to that as a poison pill, no pun intended. So Representative Bacon, were you happy to see it revert back to the way it initially was
Right,
in
when
the
we
House?
sent it out. I was. One of the issues when they brought it up was the word site of service, and the way things are paid now, if the hospital owns, let's say a hospital in Vanderbilt County, and then another hospital in Warren County, well, where is the site of service? There was the big definitions there, and people didn't understand what that meant, especially when they voted on it and put that amendment in. They didn't realize that Deaconess has a major hospital like here in Vanderbilt County, but also has one in Warren County. So if you were not at the major site of service, you were supposed to charge separately at a lower rate. That's what was thought with the amendment, and it wasn't. As you said, it was a poison pill. We have 3 hospitals over there, and this happens all over the state. So
it really could have damaged rural hospitals.
it could
quite a
very
bit.
much, it would have damaged ours, but would even done worse with the rural hospitals. And so that was the poison pill that it was concerned about. So by taking the site of service out of that fixed that. And what we're looking at now also, when we passed the bill, we knew that CMS, the federal guidelines, have already placed some limitations on site of service. And they're requiring that with their billing process now for Medicare. And then they're making the process of where it's at, making the decision of what's paid in that. We know that there's more rules coming in April, and so we're better off just to leave that out and wait and see what happens with that. The transparency language in there is really good, and it's still, as Representative Hostetler said, going to give people the ability to look and see and to see what's going to cost here, what's going to cost there, so they can make a decision on that. So we want to keep that, and then we'll look at the rest of it as it goes.
Yeah, all right. Of course, healthcare always a big issue. Senate Bill 184 lets the Indiana Farm Bureau offer its members health insurance. It passed almost unanimously, and it is headed back to the state Senate. I'm guessing you both voted for that. Why do you think it's a good idea, Representative Bacon?
Well, if you're a individual sole proprietor and you have less than one employee or less, then you're very limited to what you can get that's as far as an insurance policy. And farmers are that. They're just not individuals now. They actually are sole proprietors, they're individual businesses. So they weren't able to get programs and policies that they could financially afford. So the majority of them weren't using it. I mean, what we found out is they just weren't getting insurance. And so they had no ability to get the coverage. So that's what we're giving them the ability to have that. So I think it's very, very important for them.
And Representative Hostetler, you voted for it as well?
I did. After speaking with some of the folks at Farm Bureau, they had polled some of their members, and remember, the Farm Bureau is not just farmers. There are all kinds of people that are members of the Farm Bureau, and this opens it up to anyone that's a member. And the number one issue amongst their membership, which does include a lot of farmers, wasn't tariffs, it was health care. And so this is something that can address something not just for farmers, but other members of Farm Bureau, and the Farm Bureau is not an exclusive organization. Anyone can join. And so if this is something that might help someone, they can go through the Farm Bureau, gain the membership, and then have possibly a more affordable health care option to them.
Now we were talking about transparency. Senate Bill 5 is headed to the governor. It creates a health care cost database. You both voted for the measure, as I understand it. Why do you think it's a good idea for there to be a database for healthcare costs? It sort of gets back to what we were talking about. Is that correct, Representative Hostetler?
I believe that if you have a database, if there's something that people can come back and compare to, if there are any outliers, if there's something that doesn't add up with everything else, if that's available, if you can if we can have that database where that information is available to us, it will help us to possibly reel in some I don't want to say bad actors, but some folks that may be in a place that's not actually necessary or driven by the market.
That would provide more transparency?
Correct. I mean, it just like let's take hip replacement. If we have the database to show throughout the state of Indiana what's going to cost for you to get just a routine hip replacement without any other problems with it, then we have that information and we can see where that's happening and what's going on. That'll give us the data in the future to do that. Really won't change anything short term here. It's going to take a while to build that up so that we'll have something to look at and go from there.
Right. Another health measure, the cost of insulin has been very high for some folks. Senate Bill 255 allows people to buy insulin without a prescription. It's headed now to the governor. You both voted for this measure as well. Representative Bacon, tell us about it. Why do you feel it's important?
Well, insulin is not, it was without a prescription for a number of years before. I think it was like 10 or 15 years ago that it required a prescription. Went on the, but it's not a scheduled drug. It's not anything that we're concerned about somebody overdosing on or doing.
Right. And
the people who need insulin know that. So it's really just not, it's unnecessary government regulation in my opinion. It didn't go quite the way I wanted it, but I thought maybe the first time that they should have the initial prescription from a physician and how they're treating the diabetes, and then from then on, they know they're diabetic, they know how much they need, and then work with the pharmacist to get that and get their needs. But I still think it's a good bill.
And will it help reduce prices of
Yes,
insulin?
I think it will.
And perhaps you'd like to weigh in there, Representative Hosteller.
Just like any other medication, once it gets basically over the counter, the prices are driven down, and not just pricing. This was causing situations where people had to wait to get their insulin, and that's detrimental to their health. And this hopefully will remove at least one hurdle that could cost people their health and possibly their life, honestly.
I'd just like to remind our radio listeners you are listening to Lawmakers on WNIN FM. Our guests today are Indiana Representatives Ron Bacon and Matt Hostettler. Let's talk about Senate Bill 340. It limits local governments from enacting regulations on landlords without approval from the legislature. You both voted for the House measure, which still needs to go through a conference. I guess it's one of those state versus local level issues. Why do you think it should be addressed at the state level and not the local level? I'll begin with you, Representative Hostetter.
I'm going to refresh my memory a little bit.
Senate Bill 340, it limits local governments from enacting regulations on landlords. I believe Indianapolis was the main issue on this?
Yes, I'm sorry, so what they were doing was, what was happening, there were restrictions being placed on landlords, and once certain municipalities that will remain nameless were going after some of them, they were collecting fees and fines, and none of that was actually even being distributed to the people that were being affected. And so what this does is it sets a state regulation in that instance, and I believe Senate Bill 340 is also what we amended in the protection for mobile homes. There were some good amendments that went in on the floor from Representative Moed. I believe I'm sorry, misspoken, that's the wrong bill. But it got really busy towards the end. But basically just giving uniformity to how we treat landlords, and I believe the state can regulate that well.
All right, and Representative Bacon, so what is your take on that? Why do you feel for this kind of a measure the state should be overseeing the local level?
Well, I think it depends on what landlords are doing on a statewide basis and what the utilities are and are monopolies. So we don't have, it's local control, yes, but still in the issue, let's say water. Water is a commodity that an individual's buying from this local utility. Electric is a commodity they're buying from the municipal utility if they have it. The sewer and trash is not, that's a public safety issues. So those should be regulated to the point of the landlord and the tenant. But if the tenant's going to buy a commodity from the landlord or from the municipal utility, they shouldn't be involving the landlord in that, because it should be the contract between that. So that's why we did that last year. I think it was 1347, if I got the number right, and we did that. But then they found ways to go around it, and then they were trying to charge make the landlord co-sign for things that they didn't really shouldn't be co-signing for, and just trying to regulate them. So that's what we're trying to do is fix it.
Okay, so Senate, this is the Senate version of 1165 then.
Okay.
Is that what you're mentioning when you say
Senate
tenants?
Bill
Okay.
340. Well, yeah, and I
340.
believe it, as we say, it entailed, I think the Marion County or Indianapolis case is what was driving it, correct?
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's move on to another issue here. Land banks have become a popular way of doing away with blight and that sort of thing. We have one here in Evansville. There's a House Bill 1370, which would allow cities and counties to collaborate on land banks. How would this help local communities as you see it, Representative Bacon?
Well, especially somewhere like Warwick County, where I represent, or some of the smaller counties, we have small cities and small towns, 3,000 and 4,000 only, and then maybe the largest town I have or city is 8,000, one in Spencer County, one in Warwick County. So by being able to collaborate with the county itself, which is much larger, then I think we have the ability to do more. And so that, I don't know how that would work in Vandenberg, because Evansville's pretty good size compared to that. So.
Right.
But
Representative Hostetler, why do you support the measure?
Yes, I believe this came through local government. I believe this Representative May's bill, and he explained that there were a lot of folks that wanted to take advantage of things like that, and just because the small rural communities, they didn't have the scope to do that. And this, again, is a May provision. It doesn't force anyone into it, so you can bring communities together that are already seeking relationships, and they can get more done collectively through the same means that Evansville or Vandenberg County, they have the scope to do that, whereas you get out to parts of Pike, parts of DuBois, they may not have all the resources available to them, but collectively they can accomplish a lot more.
I think if we can look at that as with the regional city grants and things that we did in the past, where the communities got together and worked on those, and collaborating together, they were able to pull down that grant money and affect all of the community, not just one small area.
Right. So same kind of idea.
Same concept, yes.
I got you. All right. Well, it's an election year, obviously, and there's a Senate Bill 334 that deals with a variety of voting issues, including maintenance of the voter rolls. One concern is that eligible voters might get purged. I believe the Senate has dissented on the House version. You both voted for it. Can you tell us, are you happy with the House version of the voting issue? And we'll start with Representative Bacon this time, I believe.
Well, let's start with Representative Hostetler.
I believe that everything that I've seen, the concerns about someone possibly being purged, if the voter's adamant about paying attention. So one of the concerns was if there were a lot of John Smiths, and you went through the program and a John Smith was, you were removed because you had the same name as someone else. I believe that with any amount of vigilance by the voter themselves, I don't see that to be an issue. But one of the things that this does do is it removes potential fraudulent voters from the roll, and that was what I believe was the gist of the bill. There were a lot of people on these voter rolls that were either deceased or they had moved, and what triggered a lot of this is there were multiple states with the actual same voter, and just using me for example, I've never lived in Kansas, but Matt Hostetler is registered to vote in Kansas and he's registered to vote here, and some of these things allow them to cross-reference, okay, where is his or her last residence, and it should effectively remove them from where they shouldn't be.
Representative Bacon, do you think are there any concerns there about folks?
I really don't have any concerns, because I think we should be. I've been around elections for a long time, many years, and one of the things we didn't do in the past was remove anyone. And we would know, we would be at a voting precinct, and we'd know this person has passed away 10 or 15 years ago and they're still in the voting rolls. So anything we can do to make that better so that we don't have fraud is, in my opinion, a good thing. And as long as we have the protections, and it is up to the voter to be sure to be vigilant and make sure they're not on there.
As we mentioned, we're in the closing days of the General Assembly. In fact, it may close up in just a couple of days. Do you have any bills that may have stalled this year, or that you hope to bring back again next year, or maybe something that's still alive in these last couple of days? Let's start with Representative Hostetler.
I've been fortunate enough. I've authored 4 bills this session, and one of them was a transparency bill. So House Bill 1004 is not my bill, but it's doing something similar, so that's still alive. I had a bill that affected municipal elections, and that fortunately passed through the House and the Senate unscathed and has become law. House Bill 1343, which is the New Harmony and Wabash River Bridge Authority.
Right.
That concurred yesterday, so that should be moving through. The only piece of legislation that I have that hasn't been passed or is another piece of legislation is bringing a magistrate to Gibson County to help our judges out up there. And that language is still alive in Senate Bill 256. We're hoping to have a conference committee on that Monday or Tuesday, and if we can bring that home, I couldn't ask for more as far as what I've put in this year. Been very
coming down to the wire. Yes,
very
indeed.
fortunate.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Representative Bacon, now you are retiring this
Yes,
year. We should
I am.
mention, and congratulations on
Thank
your
you.
retirement. Can you tell us about your future plans and maybe some hopes for these last couple of days of the General Assembly?
Well, still working on that. Future plans, I'm planning on running. I am on the ballot for Ward County Council and at large, so that's my next step in my political future. And then stay home, play with my grandkids. That's watching them grow up through their teenage years. They're going to need all the help they can get. And that. Still have a couple of things going. I got the EMS compact bill done and passed in the governor's office, and then we got the psychology compact bill also passed to help our workforce development throughout the state of Indiana. But that's got held up in Ways and Means, so it's probably a dead bill right now. And so hopefully they'll bring it back next year and get that done. But the transparency and the healthcare is what I've worked on the hardest this year. So I'm quite pleased how way things came out.
Any reflections on your years in the General Assembly?
Well, like I said, I'm just happy with what I've done. I feel that my legacy will sort of be I did the excuse me, the concussion bills.
Oh, right.
Did all of those, and the cardiac arrest awareness and the heat exhaustion bills. So my whole tenure there for athletic safety in the schools has been what I've worked on the full 10 years I've been in the healthcare committee. So that's sort of the best things I've done besides my right to life bills.
Okay, all right. Well, Representative Bacon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And again, congratulations on your retirement. Representative Hostetler, I believe this was your first visit to Lawmakers.
It was.
We certainly appreciate you joining us today as well.
Thank you.
Next week, our scheduled guests are Indiana State Senator Vanita Becker. She'll be joining us once again for what may be our last Lawmakers show of the year. We will, well, I believe Vanita is the only guest we have planned at this point. We'll see if someone else can join us before next week. Thank you again for joining us for WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson. Have a good weekend.